When I went to study in Hong Kong, Henry has played around with all the pretty women in the circle. Suddenly, he took an interest in someone as plain-looking and timid as me. His intense pursuit gradually made me fall for him. But within a month of being together, he said he was tired of it. On the day we broke up, as I walked into the pouring rain without looking back, someone worried, "Do you think the good girl might do something drastic?" Henry, already infatuated with his new fling, casually asked his good friend for help. "Anthony, could you go check on her? I'm worried she might not be thinking straight and might jump into the sea." That night, as the rain poured down over Hong Kong Island, Anthony found me soaked and sat me on his lap. He answered Henry's call, sounding weary. "Yeah, I found her. You have fun." He lowered his head and whispered in my ear, "Don't worry. She's being good." Chapter 1. Henry called me. He told me to meet him at the club he often visits, in room 808. When I arrived, it had just rained. Getting out of the car, my hair was already wet. As the cold air hit me, I couldn't help but shiver. The door to the room was ajar, and I could hear the sound of singing. It took me a while to spot Henry. He had his arm around a very young and beautiful girl. When he saw me, Henry's expression didn't change at all. He even pulled the girl closer. I stood there, stunned, my mind completely blank. I couldn't understand. Henry had pursued me passionately for a whole year. I had agreed to be his girlfriend for less than a month. Just 3 days ago, he was still holding my face, smiling, and telling me he loved me. But now, there was another girl sitting on his lap. A girl 100 times prettier and sexier than me. Chapter 2. Rachel. Henry's voice was calm. "There are a few things I need to make clear." The music in the room stopped. Everyone else wisely kept quiet. I stood there, feeling a wave of embarrassment wash over me. "I did like you before, but I'm here for a relationship, not to join a convent." Henry's voice, though tinged with alcohol, remained gentle. "I respect your thoughts. And if you're not willing, okay, I won't force you. But I'm tired of this. So let's break up." My wet hair clung to the side of my face, cold against my skin. I couldn't hear anything around me, nor could I see the strange looks people were giving me. I just stared blankly at Henry. "But 3 days ago, you said you loved me." "Henry, it's not that I didn't want you to kiss me. I just wasn't ready." "All right, Rachel, let's not talk about this." Henry raised his hand to cut me off, still looking at me with that same gentle expression. "I want to break up now. Do you understand?" Chapter 3. The tears that had been welling up in my eyes for so long suddenly fell. I grew up in a single-parent family, plain-looking, timid, and shy. From middle school to college, I lived like I was invisible, until I came to Hong Kong to study, until I met Henry. It was the first time someone had pursued me so passionately, the first time someone had cherished and cared for me like that. I fell for him easily, but he said he was tired of it. Was it because of the kiss I pushed away? Or was it because I refused his request to move in with him? My mind was in turmoil, but subconsciously, I was still thinking about trying to salvage the relationship. "Henry, can we not break up?" "Rachel, do you really want me to say something that will hurt you?" Henry frowned. "I don't like you anymore. It was just a temporary lapse in my taste. Understand?" I raised my hand and wiped away my tears. Then I slowly took 2 steps back. "I understand. Henry, don't contact me again, okay?" "Okay, I won't." I nodded hard, trying to force a smile, but in the end, I still couldn't hold back my tears. "I'll go now. I won't bother you anymore." I wiped my tears away again, turned around, and stumbled out of the private room. Chapter 4. She is so old-fashioned. Why would you like a mainland girl like her? The girl beside Henry suddenly spoke. It was just something new. Henry picked up his wine glass and replied calmly, but he glanced toward the door again. When he first met Rachel, he knew she was timid and obedient. When he stopped her to ask for her phone number, her eyes were wide open, round and large, as if she might faint in the next second from fright. Thinking about it still amused him. He had never met a girl like that. It felt refreshing, but that was all. He wasn't a patient man. The rain is getting heavier outside. Someone suddenly whispered. Henry looked toward the terrace. It was a thunderstorm, with rain pouring down as if the rivers were flooding. Do you think Rachel might do something drastic? Hard to say. She looked like she was going to break down earlier. Henry, should we go check on her? A bolt of lightning tore through the dark sky. Henry suddenly put down his wine glass. Anthony. He looked toward a corner not far away, where Anthony had been silent all night. Henry wasn't comfortable sending anyone else. Those guys were all playboys, and Rachel was too sweet and naive. But Anthony, the prince of Macau's underworld, who played both sides of the law, had no interest in women. How about you go check on her? If she really does something drastic, it'll be a big problem. Anthony slowly raised his eyes, his expression indifferent as he looked at his friend. Henry regretted it as soon as he finished speaking. Anthony was naturally cold and disinterested in meddling in other people's affairs. He was probably asking for trouble. If you don't feel like it, okay. But Anthony suddenly agreed. Henry was a little surprised, but Anthony had already stood up, grabbed his suit jacket, and walked out. Chapter 5. The rain was coming down too hard. I stood on the steps, waiting for a long time. The doorman came over for the third time to ask if I needed an umbrella or if he should call a car for me. I nodded absent-mindedly in response. With the umbrella open, I didn't linger any longer. Without hesitation, I walked into the pouring rain. Maybe it was because I had been caught in the rain. I hadn't walked far before I started feeling dizzy and unsteady. The wind and rain were so strong that the umbrella in my hand was being blown all over the place. That's when Anthony's Rolls-Royce pulled up in front of me. The back window rolled down, revealing his cold and indifferent face. My fingers, numb from the cold, gripped the umbrella handle tightly. Instinctively, I took a step back. I had heard Henry mention a few times that Anthony's family had ties to the underworld. My understanding of the underworld came from old Hong Kong movies. Those who mixed in those circles were always ruthless and merciless. So, the first time I met Anthony, I was terrified of him. I never even dared to look him in the eye. Chapter 6. Get in. I had just taken a step back when Anthony spoke. The raindrops pounded on the umbrella like a hail of beans, adding to the noise. His voice wasn't loud, but to me, it sounded like a thunderclap. My steps froze. I stared at him, wide-eyed with fear. The rain and fog were so heavy that I couldn't see the emotions in his eyes. All I felt was fear, the kind of fear that comes from realizing how small and insignificant you are. Like an ant, it spread from my feet to my entire body. Trembling, I walked over to the car. The driver got out to open the door for me and took the umbrella from my hand. I whispered my thanks and bent down to get into the car, but my legs felt like they were filled with lead. I could barely lift them. My soaked sneakers left muddy water stains on the clean car mat. I was so nervous that I didn't know where to put my hands or feet. I lowered my gaze, wringing my hands, wishing I could curl up into a tiny ball, or better yet, become invisible. The car moved forward smoothly. The headlights cut through the rain and fog. The Rolls-Royce felt like a lone boat on the sea. I had no idea where it was heading. I was lost in thought when Anthony suddenly called my name. Rachel. Yes. I snapped back to reality and instinctively looked at the man beside me. Anthony's suit jacket was open, and 3 buttons on his shirt were undone. He leaned back in his seat, his long legs spread casually. He looked like a lion lying in wait, exuding a quiet yet commanding presence. I quickly averted my gaze. My heart was pounding like a drum. Where was the car headed? What was Anthony going to do? Kill me and dismember my body, or tie me up and throw me into the sea? At worst, sell me on the black market. But I hadn't done anything to offend him. He lifted his foot, lightly tapping my jeans with his shoe. His long fingers pointed to his knee. Come here. A loud roar sounded in my ears. I stared at him, my face and neck burning with heat. Chapter 7. Don't understand? Anthony raised an eyebrow slightly. Come here. Sit here, he repeated. His speech slowed down a bit, and his Mandarin was surprisingly standard. I heard him clearly, but I was too stunned to react, until he showed a bit of impatience. The car suddenly bumped. I felt as though my heart was about to jump out of my chest. All sorts of gruesome images flooded my mind. My nerves were instantly stretched to the limit. Before my mind could even react, my body had already chosen to protect itself. I practically crawled onto his lap, using both hands and feet. I even obediently positioned myself as he indicated, straddling him. Anthony's lips curved slightly. He handed me a soft towel. Wipe your face. I took it obediently. Suddenly, his phone rang. Anthony picked it up, sliding to answer, his voice lazy. Hello, Henry. Chapter 8. The towel slipped from my hand. Anthony glanced at me and suddenly smiled. Yeah, I found her. His voice was deep and resonant in the confined space. Have fun. Anthony held the phone in one hand. With the other, he gently pinched my chin. The rain was pouring down, obscuring the view. The car jolted slightly, and I lost control, my body tipping forward. Anthony's thin lips barely brushed against my cheek. His breath, warm and ambiguous, brushed past my ear. I froze, but Anthony didn't push me away. Instead, he lightly pecked the corner of my lips. When he spoke again, his voice was slightly hoarse. Don't worry, she's being good. As soon as the words were spoken, the call was disconnected. In the small, enclosed world separated by the partition, Anthony's fingers stroked my chin, pulling me closer bit by bit. Rachel. His fingers applied a little pressure. I frowned and had to slightly part my lips, just in time to catch the deep kiss he pressed upon me. Henry doesn't like obedient ones, but I do. His kiss was so deep and heavy that I clumsily couldn't breathe. I was almost out of breath. Anthony paused for a moment, his long fingers slipping under my sweatshirt. He pinched the soft flesh at my waist, gently kneading, until my breathing became erratic, and my eyes filled with a watery glow. My fingers clutched his sleeve, tightening and loosening, my nerves trembling with tension. Don't be afraid. He kissed me lightly again, as if to comfort me. It's your first time. We won't do it here. Chapter 9. It wasn't until dawn that the rain finally began to ease. Henry stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, absent-mindedly. He lit a cigarette. A friend walked over inside. Rachel is so timid. I can't imagine how scared she must be right now. Anthony probably won't make things difficult for her. The Prince of Macau. You know his temperament well. He's always hated women, especially the kind who cry all the time. Henry exhaled a puff of smoke. Scaring her a bit isn't a bad thing. You used to like her so much. You chased her for a year. Why are you tired of her after just a month? She's boring, like a piece of wood. Henry chuckled. She wouldn't let me kiss her or touch her. I'm not a monk. Take it slow. Rachel is obviously a good girl. Henry leaned against the glass, a faint smile spreading in his eyes. What do you know? After this incident, she'll stop playing hard to get. You've got your ways. His friend couldn't help but laugh. How could a little girl like Rachel ever outplay you? She'll just have to obediently listen to you from now on, letting you do whatever you want. I'm not going to bully her. Henry extinguished his cigarette. You guys should stay away from her for a few days. Let her cool off before we talk again. All right. Waiting for you to win the beauty's heart. She's no beauty. Rachel is fair-skinned and pretty, with a little dressing up. She's a real beauty, isn't she? Henry smiled again. Why didn't you say that before? When she first came to Hong Kong, she was a little country bumpkin. But lately, she's clearly learned how to dress up. Last time you went out with her, she was wearing a green dress. Tisk. Those slender legs. So white they were blinding. Henry's smile suddenly faded. What are you talking about? Haha. It's just surprising, given how unremarkable she was when she first arrived. Henry's face darkened as he turned and walked out. If you like her so much, why don't you go after her? Rachel only has eyes for you. I wouldn't stoop to such an embarrassing thing. This pleased Henry. His expression softened a bit. He thought to himself that he had originally planned to keep her in the cold for a month, to make her learn her place, so she'd be completely obedient to him in the future. But now, he thought half a month would be enough. After all, Rachel was timid, sensitive, and prone to tears. Chapter 10. When I came out of the shower, Anthony was already on the terrace, smoking. He was shirtless, wearing only a pair of dark blue pajama pants. The waistband hung loosely on his slim waist, revealing a broad chest and a well-defined set of abs. I stood there nervously, not daring to move forward or speak. The words Anthony had said in the car still echoed in my mind like distant thunder, rumbling endlessly. "Aren't you coming over?" Anthony extinguished his cigarette and glanced back at me. "It doesn't seem to be raining outside anymore." I nervously bit my lip. Anthony's house was enormous, so large that if he didn't let me leave, I wouldn't even know how to find the exit. Anthony turned around, leaning against the white railing, and looked at me. "What do you want to say?" His hair was half wet, and his deep, unfathomable eyes seemed to be filled with a cold, damp chill. I mustered the courage to look at him briefly before quickly lowering my gaze. My voice grew quieter. I want to go back to school." Go back to school in the middle of the night? A classmate of mine rented a small apartment near the school. I could stay there for the night. "Are you afraid of me?" I instinctively shook my head, but my face grew paler. Anthony didn't say anything, but his gaze lingered on me, scrutinizing me from head to toe. The loungewear I was wearing had been prepared by the housekeeper, a dark blue satin material, the same as what Anthony was wearing. At a glance, it looked like we were wearing matching outfits. "If you want to go back to school, it's not impossible." I quickly looked up at him, my eyes wide. When Henry talked about Anthony, he often mentioned how bad-tempered and difficult he was to get along with. But now, Anthony seemed almost easygoing. "Rachel, come here." I hesitated but eventually gathered the courage to walk over. The most important thing now was to get out of here, so it was best not to anger him. I stood in front of him, but there was still about a meter of distance between us. He was taller than Henry, even in my slippers. I barely reached his chest. "How long did you date Henry?" I immediately pressed my lips together. Hearing Henry's name felt like a needle piercing my heart, the pain dull and unrelenting. As soon as Anthony spoke, my eyes began to redden. 1 month and 3 days. You remember it pretty clearly. Of course. I remembered clearly. After all, Henry was my first love. He was the first person I ever liked. Why didn't you let him kiss you? Anthony grabbed my chin, forcing me to look up at him. My tear ducts throbbed with pain. I didn't want to cry, didn't want to shed tears for Henry, but I couldn't help it. My eyes gradually filled with a mist of tears. I didn't refuse. I just wasn't ready. I turned my head, trying to break free from Anthony's grip, but he only tightened his hold. "You were very obedient when I kissed you in the car, weren't you?" Chapter 11. When he brought up what happened in the car, I couldn't help but feel even more aggrieved and angry. If I hadn't been so scared and panicked, I wouldn't have let him do as he pleased and taken my first kiss. "Are you really that afraid of me?" Anthony sneered. "I'm not going to eat you, but you could kill someone." "Who said I would kill someone?" "That's what they all say." "So, you were only obedient because you were afraid of me?" I lowered my eyes and didn't say anything. Anthony let go of my chin, his voice suddenly cold. "You'll stay here for the next few days." "No." I panicked. "You just promised me I could go back to school." "I only said it's not impossible to go back to school." "Then what do I have to do for you to let me go back?" I didn't want to miss my classes. I had worked so hard to earn this exchange program, and I just wanted to graduate smoothly, get a job, and finally escape my family. "It's simple." Anthony reached out, his long fingers brushing aside the slightly damp hair at my temple. "Kiss me, Jay, just once." Anthony seemed amused by my naive stupidity. "Until I'm satisfied." My eyes widened in disbelief. I couldn't believe someone could so shamelessly say something so indecent. But Anthony suddenly hooked his arm around my waist. With just a slight force, I was pulled against his bare chest. He looked down at me, his eyes half-lidded. His breath carried a faint scent of mint and smoke. "Rachel, if your kiss doesn't satisfy me," his thin lips curved slightly, "the sea is right outside that door. I'll throw you in myself, to feed the fish." Under his scorching palm, my skin trembled uncontrollably, but Anthony only tightened his grip. Our bodies were now pressed tightly together, leaving no space between us. The fear I had felt in the car surged back even more violently. I opened my mouth, my tongue almost tied in knots. It took me a while to stammer out, how do I kiss you to make you satisfied? Chapter 12. Anthony looked at the small, makeup-free face in front of him. She wasn't exactly beautiful. Her eyes weren't large, and her eyebrows were faint. Her double eyelids were shallow, forming a slight fan shape at the corners, but her eyelashes were thick and long. Her nose wasn't high, with a slight, childish upturn. Her chin was round, with a small dimple. Her greatest asset was probably her fair skin. Her frame was smaller than average, making her seem delicate. As he held her, only one word came to his mind: soft and boneless. Anthony thought back to how she obediently straddled his lap in the car. Her hair was wet, and her face was damp with moisture. When he kissed her lips, they were soft and springy like jelly. It was strange. She hadn't even kissed him yet. He only had to think about that interrupted kiss in the car, and he was already reacting. Now, she was staring up at him with wide eyes. Her dark pupils reflected only his face. His gaze fell on her slightly pouting lips. After the hot shower, her lips had returned to their original rosy color. He felt a wicked urge to taint her. Want to know? His fingers traced her lips. She seemed especially sensitive, her whole body starting to tremble again. Yes. Anthony smiled. You'll understand soon enough. But now, it's time to kiss me, Rachel. Chapter 13. I had never initiated a kiss before. Anthony was so tall that I had to stand on tiptoe just to reach his lips. Maybe it was the ambiguous atmosphere. Maybe it was because Anthony's face was simply too tempting. My mind was spinning. The moment I touched his lips, my entire body felt like it was about to explode from the heat. Open your mouth. Anthony's voice was a bit hoarse. Huh? I stared at him with wide, innocent eyes. As soon as my lips parted slightly, Anthony suddenly took the lead. He invaded deeply, kissing me intensely. He pulled me into his embrace, almost crushing me. Rachel. Anthony's warm palm rested over my eyes. Close your eyes. The rain, which had paused for a while, suddenly began to fall again, softly tapping against the glass. In the vast bedroom, the sound of the man's breathing grew heavier. About half an hour later, the room finally fell silent. I rubbed my sore wrists and knelt on the bed. Anthony leaned over from the headboard, kissing my already swollen lips. Tired? I nodded, my wrists aching painfully. My lips were so swollen they felt numb. The air was filled with a strange scent, like musk but not quite. I couldn't help but wonder, seeing the expression on Anthony's face earlier, was he satisfied? Can I leave now? Anthony seemed to be in a good mood and nodded. You can leave. Just as I was about to rejoice, he spoke again, but you'll have to come back tomorrow night. Why? I was utterly surprised. Weren't you satisfied just now? Anthony frowned. That's something I can say. But you shouldn't. Although I was satisfied. But you're too clumsy. Anthony's gaze fell on my hands, clumsy and awkward. You still have a lot to learn. But you were clearly comfortable. He had to admit that. This kind of awkward inexperience brought a kind of stimulation that was beyond imagination. You have two choices, either go all the way, or come to my place every night. Chapter 14. I didn't struggle for more than a few seconds. I'll come every night. No matter what. It was better than going all the way. In my deeply ingrained beliefs, you don't sleep with a man until marriage. Send me your class schedule. I'll come to pick you up. I mustered the courage to suggest, can I come by myself? If Anthony came to pick me up, it would instantly cause a sensation in the whole city. But I didn't want to attract attention. I didn't want to be in the spotlight. Don't worry. I'll switch to another car. What low-profile car could you possibly have? Anthony had already changed the subject. Bring me some cookies tonight. The ones you make yourself. You know I can bake cookies? Anthony's voice was emotionless. You've brought them to Henry several times. He didn't like them, but I thought they tasted pretty good. He didn't eat them? No. I felt a wave of sadness wash over me, my heart aching, thinking about how much effort I put into making those treats, only for Henry to never even touch them. Although they weren't expensive, they were still made with care. If he didn't like them, he could have told me. He didn't have to casually give them away. Get some sleep. I'll take you back to school at dawn. Anthony pulled me into his arms. I tried to pull away, but he grabbed my hand and guided it somewhere. Don't move. If you provoke it, you'll only tire yourself out. I immediately tensed up, not daring to move. Anthony chuckled softly. You really are obedient. Go to sleep, Rachel. Chapter 15. I begged Anthony the entire way. He finally agreed to stop the car a block away from the school. When I got out, I gathered the courage to make another request. When you come to pick me up tonight, could you stop here again? Anthony leaned back in the seat, lifting his gaze to look at me. Afraid your classmates will see? Or are you afraid Henry will find out? I clutched the hem of my shirt, lowering my eyes as I replied softly, I'm afraid of both. Why are you afraid of Henry finding out? I couldn't answer. Maybe it was because we had just broken up last night. Maybe it was because my relationship with Anthony was so unclear. I didn't want to be the subject of gossip. Henry and Anthony, they both belonged to a world different from mine. In fact, I had already come to terms with everything this morning. Henry must have just been intrigued by me for a while. I had misunderstood, thinking his feelings for me were genuine. Once I understood this, I no longer felt hurt. I'm just an ordinary girl. I've never dreamed of being Cinderella. After this experience, I should be grateful to Henry for making me see things more clearly. I just want to focus on my studies. Anthony, I know you're just intrigued, and you find it amusing to play with me. When you get bored and stop looking for me. I took a deep breath and met his gaze. There will be no ties between us, so there's no need for anyone to know about this, right? Anthony's face grew colder, and he didn't answer. He simply gestured for me to get out of the car. Then, without pausing for a second, he drove off. I stood there, stunned for a few moments, before slowly walking in the direction of the school. Chapter 16. Henry gave his new girlfriend 999 Floyd roses. The news spread like wildfire across the entire school. After all, Henry had previously pursued me for a whole year, and we were together for just over a month. Now, he was using the same tactics on his new flame. What once seemed like deep affection had become a joke. Some people found it amusing, while others, who were closer to me, felt sorry for me, but I didn't show much emotional reaction. I continued attending classes, going to the library, and eating at the cafeteria as usual. After my afternoon classes, I went to a handmade bakery to make some cookies. Anthony didn't come. He sent a driver instead, but the driver only came to pick up the cookies. Mr. Liu had something to do today and went back to Macau. The driver was a kindly older man with graying hair, and he spoke to me in a gentle, caring tone. So, should I prepare cookies again tomorrow? I'll come by at this time tomorrow to pick them up. Miss Lien, is that all right? That's fine. Then it's settled. For about a week after that, I didn't see Anthony, but the cookies still needed to be made every day. On the 7th day, the driver asked me to prepare a double batch of cookies for the next day. Mr. Liu instructed me that they will be needed tomorrow night. I didn't ask any questions and nodded in agreement. When I returned to school, I happened to run into Henry dropping off his new girlfriend. When our eyes met, I calmly looked away, without glancing back. I walked past his sports car and headed toward the school gate. But Henry called out to me, Rachel, what do you want? Henry, with his arm around his girlfriend, still looked at me with that same gentle expression. It's like this. Eva really likes the cookies you used to make. Tomorrow, I'm having a small gathering with some friends. Could you make some more? Of course. I'll pay you triple the usual rate. Is that okay? I shook my head and refused. Sorry. I have a paper to write these days, and I don't have time. Henry raised an eyebrow slightly. That's a shame. I didn't say anything more and turned to enter the school gate. But that night, when I returned from the library, Henry was waiting for me at the dormitory entrance. Rachel. Henry was wearing a simple white shirt. It looked strangely familiar. After a moment, I remembered. It was the same shirt he wore the day I accepted his advances. I once told him I liked how he looked in a white shirt. It made him seem especially gentle and clean. What do you want? Were you upset today? Upset about what? About me asking you to make cookies for my girlfriend. Not at all. I genuinely don't have time. Anthony had asked for a double batch of cookies, so I naturally didn't have time to earn money from Henry. You only have one class tomorrow. I have other things to do. Rachel. Henry suddenly took a step closer. The warm orange light in front of the dormitory illuminated his gentle features. During that month we were dating, Henry had walked me back many times, right under this very light. He had once, overcome with emotion, tried to kiss me, but at the time, people were coming and going, and I was too shy, so I pushed him away. Do you want to get back together? If you felt things moved too fast before, we can take it slow this time. We can live together after you graduate, okay? The warm light cast a soft glow on his handsome face. He was the first man I ever liked, the first to make my heart flutter. I couldn't deny that. Even at this moment, there was still some sadness in my heart. But in the end, I shook my head and refused. The smile in Henry's eyes gradually faded. I won't give you a second chance. Don't regret it. Rachel. Chapter 17. When Anthony arrived at the club, it was just 7 o'clock. He took 2 paper bags from the bodyguard. A faint aroma wafted out, mixed with a subtle hint of roses. Rachel had added a bit of wax apple juice to the cookies. She said this fruit could moisten the lungs, soothe coughs, and clear heat from the lungs, perfect for the current weather. He didn't particularly like sweets, but now, perhaps due to his affection for her, he found himself enjoying them. The attendant respectfully opened the door to the private room. When Anthony entered, Henry was sitting on the sofa, smoking. He looked a bit gloomy, seemingly in a bad mood. Everyone stood up when they saw Anthony. Henry also stubbed out his cigarette and stood up. Anthony, why did you stay in Macau for so long this time? Anthony smiled, placing the paper bags on the coffee table. Some personal matters. Got delayed for a few days. Henry was about to speak when his attention was suddenly drawn to the 2 paper bags. What's this? Cookies. Anthony took off his jacket and handed it to the attendant. He picked a sofa and sat down. His voice as lazy as always. They taste pretty good. I've been eating them every day. Want to try? Henry's face gradually turned pale, but he still reached out and picked up one of the paper bags. As the familiar scent hit him, he noticed the familiar stamp on the small box inside. Rachel's cookies. Rachel liked making cookies and cakes. She had a cartoon stamp that she used to mark the boxes containing her cookies. She had made them for him several times, but he didn't like sweets, so he always gave them away to others. Even though Rachel made those cookies exclusively for him, even though that gesture was meant for him alone, he never really appreciated it. But now, cookies bearing Rachel's name had ended up in Anthony's hands. What did that imply? Henry felt a bit lost. He stared blankly at Anthony. He wanted to ask but somehow resisted knowing the answer that was already clear to him. Anthony's phone rang just then. He answered, his voice low. Where are you? Lost? Idiot. Stay there. I'll come down to find you. He hung up and stood up to leave. Henry, feeling stiff, asked, Anthony, where are you going? Anthony's expression showed some impatience, but there was a faint smile in his eyes. Going to pick someone up. She's so dumb she can't find her way. Who needs you to pick them up personally? Anthony was putting on his suit jacket as he looked at Henry. In private, he was always relaxed and casual with his friends. It was easy to forget how powerful and intimidating his background and status were. But this time, he revealed a rare glimpse of his formidable presence. Of course, someone I like. Chapter 18. The club's garden was too large. I stood under a flowering tree, feeling a bit bored. Anthony told me to stay put and wait, so I obediently stayed where I was, not wandering around. Several white villas were hidden among lush green trees. I didn't know which direction Anthony would come from, but strangely, the unease in my heart gradually faded away. I sat down on a bench, swinging my legs, until, from the winding path, that tall and upright figure slowly emerged. Becoming clearer. Rachel. Anthony called my name. I looked at him, forgetting to stand up. Even the night breeze seemed to quiet down. In the pond beside me, there was the faint sound of insects chirping. The man approaching me had shared intimate moments with me. but after days of not seeing each other, he felt strangely unfamiliar. Anthony reached out, pinching my chin. He lifted my face to a height that was just right for him to bend down and kiss me. Then, without any hesitation, he kissed me, my breath, the oxygen in my lungs, my clear consciousness. One by one, they were stripped away, taken from me. By the time the kiss ended, there was a sound of water. The back of my neck was burning hot. I was terrified that in this dark, quiet night, someone might see such an intimate moment. Finally, Anthony's warm breath brushed against my ear. Come back with me tonight. I hadn't even opened my mouth when, out of the corner of my eye, I suddenly saw something behind him. Henry was standing there. His face was shadowed by the night, dark and brooding. I couldn't see the emotions in his eyes. Chapter 19. Anthony noticed my reaction. He straightened up and followed my gaze to look behind him. Are you following me? Anthony chuckled and reached out to pull me up. He wrapped his arm around me, holding me close. Anthony, I think you owe me an explanation. Henry's voice was still calm. What kind of explanation do you want? Anthony turned his face slightly and kissed me on the cheek. Do you get it now? Anthony. Henry's face grew darker. What you're doing isn't appropriate. What's inappropriate? You know Rachel and I. Aren't you two broken up? Anthony's hand on my waist wasn't idle either. He kept pinching the soft flesh there, absent-mindedly. Weren't you the one worried she might do something drastic, like jumping into the sea, and asked me to check on her? I was worried about her, and I asked you to help, but I didn't mean for you to. Henry couldn't bring himself to say the words stealing my partner. After all, he and Rachel had indeed broken up, and in the end, he didn't have the courage to confront Anthony like that. Henry. Anthony looked down at him. You didn't want her, but I do. How could you possibly like her? Henry was completely stunned. I looked at Anthony in shock as well, but I could only see his handsome, well-defined profile. Why wouldn't I like her? Anthony tightened his hold on me. She's great to kiss. She's very obedient. Her cookies are delicious. Most importantly, she's kind-hearted. Even though she's incredibly timid, when something happens, she doesn't back down. Like that time she faced those thugs. This small girl somehow found the courage to rush forward and protect the girl she worked part-time with. Even after getting kicked hard, she didn't let go of her friend's hand. Maybe it was this contradictory nature that attracted him. For several days after that, he couldn't stop thinking about that version of Rachel, her face pale with fear, crying yet refusing to back down. But he was a step too late. By then, Henry had already been pursuing her with intense passion for a long time, and she quickly became Henry's girlfriend, until that night when Henry suddenly lost his mind and decided to break up with her. Chapter 20. I avoided Anthony for a long time. Henry tried to see me a few times, but I didn't meet with him. Eventually, he blocked me a few times at the dormitory near the teaching building. I was forced to meet him once. Rachel. Is it because of Anthony that you won't get back together with me? It's not because of him. Henry, we're not right for each other. It's not just with you. I'm also not right for Anthony. After I graduate, I'll go back to the mainland and continue my graduate studies. I won't be coming back. Rachel, I admit that what I did before was wrong. Henry looked somewhat despondent, but after we broke up, I realized I still like you. But I don't like you anymore. Do you like Anthony? Henry's eyes were a little red that night. I saw you two kissing, and you didn't push him away. For a moment, I was silent. I didn't know how to respond. At first, I was very afraid of Anthony, but at some point, I stopped being afraid of him. During the days I was avoiding him, I occasionally found myself thinking about him, though I quickly reminded myself that someone like him, a prince in his world, was far above me, and we didn't belong to the same world. Is it because his background is better than mine? Think what you want, but Rachel, with his background, would he marry you? I haven't even thought about marriage. I told you, I still want to study. Let's not see each other anymore. Henry, Rachel. Henry tried to grab my hand, but I dodged him. I didn't look at him again, and I didn't turn back. Chapter 21. compared to Henry's persistent entanglement. Anthony hadn't sought me out again. It wasn't until the eve of my departure from Hong Kong that I saw him again. Some local classmates I was close to organized a farewell gathering. Faced with the imminent separation, perhaps never to meet again, everyone drank a little. I went to the restroom and encountered two drunk men. At first, I didn't notice that they were watching me. It wasn't until I left the restroom and saw them still standing outside, smoking, that I began to feel uneasy. I hadn't brought my phone, nor was I wearing a jacket. The sleeveless knee-length dress I wore was quite modest. But the way these two men looked at me was anything but. "Hey there, want to have a drink with us?" "Sorry, my classmates are just in the room ahead. Hanging out with classmates is boring. Why not have some fun with us?" The two men blocked my path on either side. I was scared but tried to stay calm. The wait staff were around, and my classmates were not far away. If I called out for help, these two wouldn't dare go too far. But when one of them grabbed my arm, I couldn't help but feel repulsed. Just as I was about to shake him off, he suddenly screamed and was sent flying, slamming hard into the wall. His companion was also kicked to the ground, with his face being forcefully stepped on. Anthony approached, his expression cold and dark. He stepped on the man's wrist, the sound of bones cracking echoing through the hallway. It was the first time I had seen this side of Anthony, a glimpse of the ruthless and feared Mafia prince people whispered about. I don't want to see these two in Hong Kong or Macau ever again. Anthony's bodyguards moved quickly, gagging and dragging the two men away. The hallway was left with just the two of us. Anthony didn't look at me, nor did he speak. After a moment, I quietly thanked him. He still didn't respond. I hesitated for a moment, then lowered my head and tried to walk around him to return to the private room. But Anthony grabbed my wrist. There were still marks on my arm from where the man had grabbed me. Anthony's eyes darkened further. "Anthony." I tried to pull my hand back, but Anthony pressed me against the wall. "How long are you planning to avoid me? Were you going to quietly run back to the mainland?" "I'm just following through with my plans to continue my graduate studies." "So, you plan to cut ties with me completely?" I turned my face away, trying to suppress the bitterness in my heart. There wasn't really anything between us in the first place. The truth was, when Anthony said he liked me that night, I felt a little happy, but later, I avoided him, and he didn't come looking for me. I couldn't help but fall back into that self-doubting mindset, not having been truly loved or favored. It seemed easier to accept being abandoned. "Rachel, take a look at my back." "Your back?" Anthony didn't say anything, just turned around and faced away from me. His black shirt clung to his lean, muscular frame. I was at a loss, but with his guidance, I lifted the hem of his shirt. Only a portion of his waist was exposed, but it was covered in a patchwork of scars from whippings. I was stunned. "Anthony? I didn't look for you these past days because I was recovering. Why were you injured?" "Family punishment, 19 lashes. It really hurt. I almost didn't make it. If it weren't for my father feeling sorry for me, you wouldn't be seeing me now." "Why were you punished?" At some point, my vision had blurred with tears. My fingertips trembled, wanting to touch those healing scars but not daring to. Because I didn't want a family-arranged marriage, I wanted to marry the person I love. Anthony turned around, his rough fingers wiping away the tears at the corners of my eyes. Because I knew she was timid and conservative. I've kissed her a few times, and if I didn't take responsibility, she'd probably hide away somewhere and cry. Because I've kissed her a few times, but it's not enough, I want more. So I might as well marry her. I never said I'd marry you. My voice choked, and tears streamed down my face. You didn't want to be kissed at first, but I kissed you anyway. Now I want to marry you, so you have to listen. Anthony was as forceful and domineering as when we first met. How can you be like this? Always bullying and scaring me, just like the first time we met. Because I like you. Is that how you show affection? I've never liked anyone before, so I don't have much experience. But from now on, I'll learn. Anthony didn't wait for me to respond before he lowered his head and kissed me. He pinned my wrists above my head with one hand. With the other, he grabbed my chin, forcing me to tilt my face up to meet his deep kiss. He didn't stop until my legs went weak and I could barely stand. Then he released one hand to hold my waist, pressing my body tightly against his. During a brief pause to catch my breath, I noticed the door to the private room had opened not far away. A few of my classmates had probably come out to look for me. Rachel. They called out my name but quickly covered their mouths and ran back inside. After a few steps, they turned and shouted back at me, "We didn't see anything." My cheeks burned like I was a lobster boiled in a pot. "You blush just from a kiss. What would happen if we went further?" Anthony. Anthony pinched my burning cheeks. "Rachel, marry me. If I don't agree, will you throw me into the sea?" My eyes were still red, but a smile appeared in them. Anthony seemed to think about it seriously. I couldn't bear to. "Give me some time, okay?" After a moment, Anthony nodded, "Okay." Chapter 22. After returning from Hong Kong, I rented a small apartment and started focusing on preparing for my graduate entrance exams. But the peaceful days didn't last long. My father, who I hadn't seen in years, suddenly showed up at my door. His son with my stepmother had dropped out of high school. After a few years of drifting, he suddenly announced he wanted to get married. The bride's family had an older brother who was disabled and couldn't find a wife. So, they demanded a dowry of several 100,000 yuan to buy a wife for the brother. My father and stepmother couldn't come up with the money, so they thought of me as a solution. Naturally, I refused. He immediately flew into a rage, just like when he used to hit my mother and me. Once again, he raised his hand to strike me, but this time, I pushed him away forcefully. He was old now, and years of smoking, drinking, and gambling had taken a toll on his body, and I no longer feared him as I once did. "I didn't raise you to eat for free. If you won't agree willingly, then I'll just tie you up and take you back." He shouted for the people outside to come in. As they dragged me out, the phone I had thrown under the bed was already connected to Anthony's number. Before I left, he had insisted that I set his number on speed dial. He knew a little about my family situation, so he was always a bit worried. It's strange how fate works between people. The man I once feared so much that I couldn't even look at him directly was now the first person I thought of when I was in danger. And oddly enough, I didn't even consider whether Anthony would help me or whether he would show up like a hero at the right moment. Somehow, deep down, I knew he wouldn't let anything happen to me. They took me to a small village deep in the mountains. The road was rough, so the journey took a day. By dusk the next day, as the van reached the village entrance, a black Hummer roared in, kicking up dust and blocking the van's path. Several tall, burly bodyguards jumped out of the vehicle first. Then came Anthony, dressed in a black jacket and sunglasses. When his tall, imposing figure suddenly appeared in my sight, my heart skipped a beat. The heroes from those Hong Kong movies I watched as a teenager seemed to have come to life in that moment. The men who had taken me were pale with fear, and then, the sound of police sirens echoed through the air. Anthony strode over to me and kicked away the man who was still holding onto my arm. When he saw that my hands were tied behind my back, the cold aura he emitted made me shiver. I could feel him struggling to control his anger. Even as the car drove far away, Anthony's face remained dark. After applying medicine to my wrists, he didn't speak to me again. I raised the divider between the front and back seats. Just like that rainy night when we first sat in a car together, I climbed onto his lap and settled there. Then I hugged him gently. "Rachel, I'm still angry. I know." I took a deep breath, probably summoning all the courage I had in my life. I looked up and gently kissed his chin. "I'm trying to make it up to you, Anthony." But he arrogantly pinched my chin and pushed my face away slightly. "I'm not that easy to appease." "Then how should I do it?" "You figure it out." He let go of me and turned his face away, not looking at me anymore. I wanted to laugh, but I also wanted to cry. In the end, I just leaned against him gently. "Anthony, let's get married." He still didn't respond, but a few seconds later, he lifted his hand and held me close. The mountain road was rough, and the car shook violently. "Rachel, stop squirming against me. It's the car shaking." Before I could finish, the car jolted again. I don't know if it was me or him who initiated it, but however long the car shook on the mountain road, it felt like Anthony and I kissed for just as long. Chapter 23. 3 months later, Anthony and I quietly got married, since I wanted to continue my studies. I begged Anthony for a long time. He finally agreed not to announce our marriage or hold a wedding ceremony for now. He wanted me to study in peace and stay out of the spotlight. But the condition for all this was that, although there wouldn't be a wedding for now, there would definitely be a wedding night. On the day we registered our marriage, Anthony took me to our new home. I went to the bathroom and stayed there for a long time. It wasn't until Anthony knocked on the door that I finally opened it after a lot of hesitation. The clothes and items in the new house had all been prepared by the servants in advance, perhaps because they considered this to be our wedding night. The nightgown they prepared was a bit too revealing. With such a small piece of fabric, I was too embarrassed to step out in it. But Anthony was wearing even less. Just a towel around his waist. Don't faint later. Anthony bent down and picked me up. I was so scared that I quickly tried to cover myself. But the nightgown was too short and too revealing if I covered the top. I couldn't cover the bottom. Facing each other like this, I didn't dare open my eyes. Anthony's kisses trailed downwards. Finally, they stopped at my chest. Rachel. He kissed me tenderly until I couldn't keep my lips sealed anymore. Moans slipped out between my lips. So, our Rachel isn't small everywhere after all. Anthony. My cheeks were flushed, and my eyes were filled with a spring-like tenderness. Anthony guided my hand downwards. I suddenly opened my eyes wide. Anthony? What's wrong? Why is it different from last time? So, which time do you prefer? This time I'm scared. Anthony suddenly laughed. You really know how to please your man. Later, for what seemed like half a minute, I was in a daze. When Anthony kissed me awake, he was already deeply connected with me. Anthony. I think I just had a dream. What kind of dream? He slowed down and asked gently. I was in a vast wilderness, with a thick fog so dense I couldn't see anything. There was a huge beast, and I was terrified. I felt like I was going to die. But then you appeared in the dream. Did I save you? I shook my head and looked at him with a bit of grievance. You killed the beast, but then you turned into an even scarier one. And then, you swallowed me whole. Anthony couldn't help but laugh. That dream wasn't wrong, I did swallow you whole. He kissed me, and his actions grew more intense. And I'm going to keep doing it for the rest of my life.